Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabihari Just Guru in the key, the Prabhupada key, Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam key, Nitai God Premanande. Is someone going to get breakfast to Charyan?
Yeah, that would be nice.
Okay, because they're leaving at 8:45.
Yeah, maybe.
Reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 6. Entitled Uniting Two Worlds, and this chapter is I Have Done My Part. Srila Prabhupada was getting resolved to go to the West. One of the astrologers had said that by the 4th of September, after checking with a physician, Srila Prabhupada could undertake travel, but for health only. I will go there to our Pennsylvania farm, said Srila Prabhupada. And he appeared hopeful. He didn't consider the astrologers absolute guides. He had consulted them more out of curiosity. Astrology was part of the Vedic knowledge, but the modern-day practitioners were often dubious. When Abiram came from Delhi, With a report from a new astrologer, Srila Prabhupada heard it while continuing to chant intently and silently on his beads. His main point, Srila Prabhupada said to Abhiram, was that for 6 months there is trouble, especially in the first week of September, and then again on certain dates in October and November. The longevity is 82 years, 5 months and 11 days, which means February 28th, 1978. This is according to birth and stars arrangement. But he made it very clear that due to the hand of Krishna, this could be changed. And if you can pass through 1978, then he sees 4 or 5 years ahead clear. When the report was finished, Srila Prabhupada was quiet for a few moments and then said, "By calculation, the age is finished. That doesn't matter. Rather, if I am finished now, it will be glorious. Living will also be glorious," said Tamal Krishna. You can see they didn't want Prabhupada to go. So they were always, anytime Prabhupada said something, they were trying to counteract it with something to make him stay. "Yes," said Prabhupada, "let us see as Krishna desires." Other horoscopes also showing an inauspicious time ahead due to the entry of Saturn into the 8th house. Srila Prabhupada took this to indicate that his condition was most critical. In either case, whether according to the stars or according to Krishna, who could change destiny? Everything was in Krishna's hands, but Srila Prabhupada was still inclined to tour the West. "If I can work a little more," he said, "our society will be very strong. I want to see that what I have done is made still stronger." Prabhupada's talk of travel, however, coincided with increasing weakness. He talked less. When Ramakrishna tried to encourage him to translate, he replied, "When I get inspiration, I will take it up. Don't try to force me. I am going through a difficult time and am now feeling restless. It is not mechanical." Srila Prabhupada ki jai. It's interesting, Prabhupada shows an example at every step of the way. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 17, entitled The Descent of the River Ganges, starting from text 5, is it? So I'll read a few verses and then there's a purport from text 9, I think it is. Tatra Chaturda Vijamana Chaturbhi Namabhis Chaturdisham Abhispatanti Nadanadi Patim Eva Biniv Vishati Sita Lakananda Chachur Badreti. On the top of Mount Meru, the Ganges divides into 4 branches, each of which gushes in a different direction, east, west, north, and south. These branches, known by the names Sita, Alakananda, Chakshu, and Bhadra, flow down to the ocean. Sita to Brahma, Sadanat, Keshara, Chaladi, Giri, Sikarebhyo, Doda, Prashravanti, Gandamadana, Murdasu, Patidvantarena, Bhadrashva, Varsham, Prachyam, Dishi, Kshara, Samudram, Abhi, Pravishati. The branch of the Ganges known as the Sita flows through Brahmapuri atop Mount Meru, and from there it runs down to the nearby peaks of the Kesharachal mountains, which stand almost as high as Mount Meru itself. These mountains are like a bunch of filaments around Mount Meru. From the Kesharachal mountains, the Ganges falls to the peak of Gandamadana mountain and then flows into the land of Bhadrashva Varsh. Finally, it reaches the ocean of salt water in the west. Text 7. Evam Malyavach Chikaran Jikaran nishpatanti tato nu parantavega hetumalam abhichakshu pratichyam dishi sarit patim pravishati. The branch of the Ganges known as Chakshu falls into the summit of Malyavan mountain and from there cascades onto the land of Ketumalavarsh. The Ganges flows incessantly through Ketumalavarsh and in this way also reaches the ocean of salt water in the west. Text 8. Bhajacho tarato meru shiraso nipatita giri shikaram atihaya shringavata shringad avasya damana uttaram tu kurun abita udicham dishi jaladim pravishati. The branch of the Ganges known as Bhadra flows from the northern side of Mount Meru. Its waters fall onto the peaks of Kumudha Mountain, Mount Nila, Sweta Mountain and Shringavan Mountain in succession. Then it runs down into the province of Kuru and after crossing through that land flows into the saltwater ocean in the north. Text 9. Tataivala Kananda Dakshinena Brahma Sadanad Bahunigiri Kutani Atikramya Hima Kutad Daima Kutanyati Rabha Satara Ramhasa Lutayanti Bharatam Abhivarsham Dakshinasyam Disha Jaladim Abhipravishati Yasyam Snanartam Chagachata Pumsa Pade Aswameda Rajasuya Dinam Phalam Na Durlabam Iti. Translation. Similarly, the branch of the Ganges known as Alakananda flows from the southern side of Brahmapuri, Brahmasadana, passing over the tops of mountains in various lands. It falls down with fierce force upon the peaks of the mountains, Hemakuta and Himakuta. After inundating the tops of those mountains, the Ganges falls down onto the tract of land known as Bharatavarsha, which she also inundates. Then the Ganges flows into the ocean of salt water in the south. Persons who come to bathe in this river are fortunate. It is not very difficult for them to achieve with every step the results of performing great sacrifices like Rajasuya and Ashwamedha Yagyas. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The place where the Ganges flows into the salt water of the Bay of Bengal is still known as Ganga Sagara, or the meeting place of the Ganges and the Bay of Bengal. On Makara Sankranti, in the month of January, February, thousands of people still go there to bathe, hoping to be liberated. That they can actually be liberated in this way is confirmed herein. For those who bathe in the Ganges at any time, the results of great sacrifices like Ashwamedha and Rajasuya Yagyas are not at all difficult to achieve. Most people in India are still inclined to bathe in the Ganges, and there are many places where they can do so. At Prayag, Allahabad, many thousands of people gather during the month of January to bathe in the confluence of the Ganges and Yamuna. Afterward, many of them go to the confluence of the Bay of Bengal and the Ganges to take bath there. Thus, it is a special facility for all the people of India that they can bathe in the water of the Ganges at so many places of pilgrimage. Om Gyanatmanandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshurimalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Ukam karoti vachalam bhangam lagate girim yat kripa tamam bande shigrim dinakaranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So here the various stages of the descent of the river Ganges is being described. For devotees, Ganges is considered sacred because of her connection with Lord Vishnu. This is for those who are devotees of Krishna, they see everything and everyone in relation to Krishna. They don't want to worship somebody separately from Krishna. Like sometimes people, they worship many different gods and demigods, thinking that, well, you can choose anyone you want. It's just like fashion, you know. You can go into the high street and you can choose to buy this jacket or that jacket. It's just personal choice. But it's not really the case. It's not like, well, I can worship this one, you worship that one, it's all right, it doesn't matter because Yatamat Tatapat is all the same. For a devotee who sees everything in relation to Krishna, it's all the same because they see all these different personalities as being Krishna's devotees. Just like the devotees of Krishna see Lord Shiva in relation to Krishna. And according to Brahma Samhita, there is no difference in the sense that yogurt is not different from milk. It comes from milk. But yogurt cannot do what milk can do. Milk can do all the things that yogurt can do. It can turn into milk, it can turn into curd, it can turn into burfi, but you can't make burfi out of yogurt. So this is mentioned in the Nectar of Devotion that the jiva, I think it contains 78% qualities of the Supreme Lord, but in minute quantity, of course. And Lord Shiva is at like 84% of the qualities of the Lord. Does anybody remember the number? 98? 78. No, the jiva is 78, isn't it? The jiva is 78%, and Lord Shiva, he's got more qualities. Although he's not jiva, could I have a tissue, please? Although he's not jiva tattva, he contains qualities that living entities, normal jiva atmas can't. But Lord Vishnu, then he has qualities which even Lord Shiva doesn't possess. And beyond even Lord Vishnu is Krishna. He has other qualities which only he possesses. And these are related to, I think there's 4 or 5 different things. One is that he's always surrounded by loving devotees. He's always engaged in various pastimes, is that right? And what's the other ones? He is playing on a flute. And his beauty is incomparable. So this is what Prabhupada talks about: perfect, more perfect, and most perfect. So in the material world, we look at something which is final, but Krishna is known as Navayovanam. Even you look at Krishna, if you were to see him now, and he'd be like the most beautiful person, but his his attractiveness is always becoming more and more attractive. It's not that he's static. It's like, okay, you've seen Krishna, he's the most attractive, great, what's next? No, it's not like that. He's effervescent, he's ever youthful. He is the original fountain of youth. And Ganges' fame is associated because she is coming down through the feet of the Lord who's pierced the universe. When Vamandev pierced the universe, then the Ganges came into the material world. And she has different names. One of her names is Janavi. And can anyone tell me how she got that name? Janu Muni. Yeah, what happened? And then came out of his ear. Is that right? Because he was doing his meditation, he was such a great... See, the living entities were afraid of the power of the Ganges coming onto the earth. And Lord Shiva took the Ganges upon his head. So sometimes you'll see pictures of Lord Shiva and there's a little spurt of water coming out. This is showing that the Ganges, even though the Ganges is so powerful, Lord Shiva can easily take it on his head and not be disturbed. And Janu Muni, he was doing his meditation in the path of the Ganges. And as the Ganges was flowing down, he just captured... I think he captured it in his ear or something like that. Because there's another name referring to that, isn't there? Does anyone remember that name? I can't remember it offhand. But, and it kind of all started with, the descent of the Ganges started with Indra had stolen a horse, didn't he? It was meant for a yajna. Because he was envious of, who was it now? Prithu Maharaj. Was it Prithu Maharaj? Because Kapila Muni was meditating, and when the sons went looking for this horse, then they were burnt to ashes, weren't they? And then it was only by they would only be delivered when the Ganges water touched their ashes. So therefore Maharaj Bhagarat, that's why it's also known as Bhagarati, and various other generations before him tried to bring the Ganges to descend to the earthly plane, because she was already existing in the celestial planes at that time. So excuse me that I don't remember all the facts, but what I do remember was that eventually, after a few generations, then this is also another name of Ganges is Bhagarati, because Maharaj Bhagarat, he was one of the descendants of this great personality who tried to bring the Ganges down through great austerities, and they had managed various stages, and then there was various times it was frustrated, like when it was in the path of Janu Muni, etc. And finally, the Ganges water got to the ashes of his descendants and they were liberated. So therefore, people often, they throw the ashes of their deceased relatives into the Ganges for their liberation. And it was interesting because one devotee friend of ours, back to Mark, and his cousin Goranganam and Prabhupada, they took back to Mark. He was quite young, he was only in his early to mid-30s when he passed away of cancer. And although a lot of auspicious things were done before his passing, he was actually distributing sets of Prabhupada's books to hospitals and libraries. He knew his time was short, and he knew the most auspicious thing to get the blessings was book distribution. So we had many sets sponsored, and he did many, many sets throughout the north of England. And even though physically he was struggling, he was pushing himself to do this. He was delivering the sets there. But still, even when finally he did pass away, and Prabhupada and Granganam took his ashes to the Ganges, and they both said that when the ashes were put in the Ganges, they felt a great weight lifting from them. They felt very ecstatic, like something really celestial had happened. So there's no exaggeration in the glories that we hear in the Srimad Bhagavatam of these various auspicious things, such as the auspiciousness of the Ganges. So even sometimes, by material estimation, people are saying, "Oh, the Ganges is the fifth most polluted river in the world," and they say like that. But in the nectar of instruction, we learn that even the Ganges, it may have bubbles, foam, and mud, which are considered to be impurities. One still takes bath there because we know the Ganges to give purifying effects. We just push aside the foam and we go into the Ganges. And this was an analogy by Srila Rupa Goswami to show us how we should see a devotee. We shouldn't see their external faults, the bubbles, foam and mud on them. We should just brush that aside, don't take that seriously, and see the spark of service, the spark of Krishna consciousness, which is there, their attitude for devotional service. This attitude to serving Krishna, Prabhupada explains that when a devotee is engaged in a devotional service, then it's not possible for an ordinary person to be engaged in devotional service 24 hours a day. So we shouldn't underestimate someone's ability to engage in devotional service, even if it appears there are many impurities or conditions, etc. The fact that one is engaged, we're going through the purifying process. And it's not that we should, if we focus on the bubbles, foam and mud of the Ganges, we'll think, no, I don't want to go in, and we won't get the benefit of the Ganges. If we focus on the faults of each other, we won't get the benefits of the devotee association. And we can bring out the good. When you see the good in others, then you also get the good yourself, and you bring out the more of the good in them. So this is what's called devotee association, not just that we happen to live in the same geographical location and we call it devotee association. Just like they say the fly might land on the lap of the king, but it can't say, I'm the closest to the king, everybody listen to me. That doesn't. So sometimes people, they physically get close to the spiritual master, but it doesn't mean to say that they are actually, spiritually close. Sometimes the spiritual master may be very kind to someone who is not so strong, and therefore they have to get some vapu, some physical. That doesn't mean to say that anyone who's close to the spiritual master is a weakling and we shouldn't take them seriously. Also, the other side of it is that Prabhupada explains that unless you're a big fire, then you cannot stand next to an even bigger fire. So if we stand next to a big fire, we get burnt unless we're already of the same fire nature. So therefore, it's not that everybody would be able to associate personally with the spiritual master. And this is the opportunity for our devotional service day by day is how can we learn to serve the spiritual master? If we get an opportunity to do personal service, are we going to be inattentive? He sits down to give class and then eventually somebody brings the microphone, eventually somebody brings him a cup of water or something like that. No, it would all be there, wouldn't it? So we're practicing. We can practice even when the younger, we may be an older devotee apparently by years, but we practice, and everybody, we're taking the opportunity to serve. And the purpose of serving the spiritual master, he's teaching us to serve Krishna. So sometimes from the mundane point of view, sometimes the devotee may be seen to serve in the spiritual master, and the spiritual master might be yelling at them saying, "Why are you fool? Why are you doing it like that?" And it's not as if he's like some megalomaniac, but it's just like, well, you haven't put the cup in the right place. Don't put it there, put it there. It's not necessarily he's just agitated and a control freak. But actually he's thinking, I have to show them how to serve Krishna, how to be attentive to think of what they're doing. Prabhupada says that before we become Krishna conscious, we have to become conscious. But Krishna consciousness is not some kind of sentimental, sloppy thing. It's actually become very conscious in doing things with full attention. Therefore, it's mentioned in the Sadgoswami Astakam that the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan were bowing down in scheduled measurement. Everything they did was purposeful. They weren't leaving anything to chance. They weren't a bunch of chancers that just happened to get the message of Lord Chaitanya and then they get a free ride back to Godhead. They were shown as the example of how every moment of their life was utilized in Krishna consciousness. They're writing, they're chanting, they're reading, they're serving, they're instructing, everything. So similarly, when we take bath in the Ganges, then if we do it with full consciousness, knowing that this is the mercy of the Lord in the form of the Ganges, the Lord's mercy, another form of the Lord is there. So let me take advantage of this mercy. And the foam is not the Ganges, just like the one can take gold from a filthy place, because you know that once you wash the filth off, it will be the gold will be there. So we take bath in the Ganges or Yamuna and get the benefit. Interesting, actually, in the year of Srila Prabhupada's birth, 1896, for those who don't know, then there was a British biologist who did a study of the Ganges, and he said that the bacteria which causes cholera could only survive no more than 3 hours in the Ganges. And also this malaria water, often malaria is where it can be found where there's water, especially stagnant water, but they said that Ganges does not hold this malaria bacteria, and even when Ganges water is added to other places where that bacteria is, then it is no longer able to exist. So it just shows you even the material purity of the Ganges is there, what to speak of the spiritual purity. So in one sense, the materialists might look upon it as being contaminated, but the devotees will never look upon it as being contaminated. And people have so much faith in the bathing of the Ganges that we have this world famous event called Kumbh Mela, which takes place
January.
What's that month called?
March or around Makar Sankranti.
That's it, yeah. And it takes place in Prayag, the confluence of 3 rivers, Triveni, isn't it? And those 3 rivers are the Ganges,
Saraswati and Yamuna.
yeah. And at a certain astrological confluence, and it's said that this is the biggest gathering of humans on the planet, and there's never any fights going on. It's not that the police have to get involved, and separating all the drunks from fighting with each other. In Kali in the West, you can hardly have half a dozen people together without fighting because they're so agitated. Because what is the basis of their coming together? Sense gratification. So if someone interferes with their sense gratification or frustrates them, then there's anger. But because the purpose of coming together here is for purification, worship of the Ganges, and taking sadhu sangha, etc., then they have like between 50 and 100 million or something like that. Is that right? It depends on which. If it's the Mahamela, then it has more because that's every 12 years, I think. And then they have a bigger attendance. But people come from all over India, and nowadays, because there's ISKCON devotees and many other Indian personalities who live all over the world, then sometimes they'll travel, from all over the world to go to this very special spiritual event. So this just shows you that the power of Krishna consciousness is such, when people have a common denominator, then they can reside peacefully. And this is what Prabhupada was explaining. If everyone can understand that Krishna is the supreme proprietor, the well-wishing friend of everyone, and the supreme enjoyer, then we can live peacefully, because then we're not contesting with each other. When we understand that Krishna is the enjoyer and everything belongs to Krishna, then we think, okay, well, we have to use it in Krishna's service. So then the only argument which remains is how best to do that. So even Prabhupada said that, even within ISKCON there can be disagreement, but there should never be contention. Because naturally everyone's an individual, so they have individual ways of seeing things, and Prabhupada explains that sometimes the children may argue what is the best way to please the father. One gets his slippers, one gets his pipe, one gets his newspaper. Oh yeah, he likes the newspaper best. Yeah, but he likes to put his slippers on when he comes home from work. Well, I'll get the slippers, you can get the newspaper. I don't care for the newspaper, I'll get the slippers. Well, that's good, because I'll get the pipe, because you're both wrong. And they're all right. The father's pleased with all of them. But it shouldn't be that they actually start doing things like, okay, I'll hide the slippers, or I'll set fire to the newspaper or something like that, and we'll sabotage each other's service. No, we should accept that it's called unity and diversity. So this true unity and diversity, people have caught on to this thing. There's actually, ISKCON has been so influential that the modern world don't even realise the influence of ISKCON there. But it comes to the point where the only conclusion will be the truth of Krishna consciousness, because everything resolves in Krishna consciousness. They might try to have United Nations, they might try for unity and diversity, but because they don't have the unifying principle, then there will still be diversity. Like Prabhupada explains, the United Nations, it's an attempt to bring peace to the world and to bring people to the table to not fight. But because he explains that the very symbol outside the building, United Nations building, is there's so many flags, so they think everybody put their flag there. He says, why not one flag? So they have the United Nations flag, of course, but that should be, if the nations are united, then there'd be one flag. But they have not one flag because they have their own agendas. They haven't given up the selfish I, me and mine. This is my land, this is our natural resources. So rather than, because they don't understand this Isavasham principle, until they come to accept and understand that, then everything they do, even their attempts at this COP26, it's a cop-out 26, where, until they understand that God is the supreme proprietor, He owns everything, we don't own anything. Until we understand that, then there's always going to be some kind of patchwork solution. And even they may make big adjustments. And it's no small measures that they're taking. But until they actually understand everything's here before we came, it'll be here when we've gone, and we come along and think that we're the supreme controller, and we just have this exploitative mood. So Prabhupada, he was proposing simple living, high thinking, and this is the sustainable way of life. So what happens is that you may have, I think everyone's experienced, sometimes you get an itch. Maybe you get an itch in your knee and you scratch it, and then what happens, it appears up here, it's as if, and then it goes down there. You ever experienced that, where you try to scratch an itch and then it shows up somewhere else? It's as if you're chasing it around. And this is what's happening, that they realise, oh, there's some problem here, let's deal with this in this way. And then what happens is it shows up in some other way. So this is the karma. Unless they realise what is the cause of all this disturbance in the world. They're looking at the secondary cause, they're not looking at the primary cause. The law of karma is the cause. So they look even at the secondary karmic things, such as if I burn some plastic, it will go up into the sky, and then, or if we throw some plastic in the ocean, then it has some reaction, there's consequences. So they're accepting there's consequences for the actions, but they're not also accepting other things they're doing, such as animal slaughter, abortion. These things, there's consequences for these actions. And as long as they don't believe it and they don't decide to stop these things, then there's going to be some disasters. They can't stop that. They can't stop the tide of karmic reaction. So, of course, things which they're talking about now, the Vedas have been talking about for thousands of years. Because the knowledge of how this material world can be lived in and utilised in a sustainable, peaceful fashion was given there right from the very beginning when the material world was created. You know, just like a manufacturer makes this microphone, and when you buy it, in the box is the instructions how to use it, made by the manufacturer. So this is the Bhagavad Gita, nectar of instruction, nectar of devotion, Srimad Bhagavatam, the Vedic literatures, all this knowledge, the Guru Sadhu and Shastra, this is the knowledge of how, which comes from the manufacturer. And he's saying, this is how you live peacefully in this material world. Material world is not necessarily by nature a place where you can live peacefully, but this is the best you can do in this circumstance. If you think, no, I've got a better idea, then what do? We become more and more entangled in Maya's complexities. We think, we don't need God, we can do it ourselves. And to some degree, we're all bitten by that. We're thinking that we're devotees of Krishna, but so many times we think, I'm the doer. I know better than everyone. I'm the controller. We don't listen, our ears are closed. To some extent, we all have this thing where we're maintaining our opinion, we're maintaining our viewpoint at the expense of actually learning how to be a better devotee, at the expense of learning how to be more Krishna conscious. So therefore, we should always try to cultivate eagerness to hear. For eager to hear, we'll find so much lessons in so many things. It's like in the Shastra, in the later cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam, it's mentioned about the different types of gurus, such as the bumblebee. So how is the bumblebee a guru? Does anyone remember that?
Going to places of honey, nectar, and everything, nectar, and so applying the discrimination in the sense, okay, where is the good thing and taking the good thing out of that? Where is the good thing and taking the good thing?
He's taking a little from every flower. He doesn't kill the flower, right? Materialists, what do? They extract some natural resource until they kill it, till they finish it, and then they move on to something else. They don't have it's a mode of passion. The bumblebee is in the mode of goodness because he's just taking a little nectar from this flower, a little from that one, and then tomorrow he can come back and get more. So the bumblebee is a guru like that, teaching simple living. So there's so many different gurus there. And what else is there? Anyone remember other gurus from that lesson?
What is it? Wood maker or something where there's a band and party or some marriage ceremony going on, but he's so absorbed in his task, either wood making or archery or something, that he doesn't even know a stream of people went by.
That's true. And in India, if you've ever had a wedding party, there's nothing more attention-grabbing than that. It's so lively and very noisy and very loud. Any time of the day or night. There's no noise pollution law in India by the looks of it. When Raghunath and I were in Udupi, in the Ayurvedic clinic, along the road, just a couple hundred yards, there was some kind of park where people would have weddings, and it could be any time, day or night. and you're trying to sleep, and it can be going on all night. And it's whenever they have any amplification, everything's to the 10. It's never like 9 or 8 or let's find a nice sign. It's just everything. If you've got it this, then you have to get the max out of it. Even if it's only like this size of speaker, it's got to be to the max where it's just distorting till it hurts your ears. But that's okay. It's just enthusiasm. They get such enthusiasm. And so that lesson is that regardless of what's going on externally, a devotee is always single-pointed in their determination in Krishna consciousness. So, in this way, if we're eager to hear, then we can see so much lessons in so many things. We can get instructions from so many things, and it doesn't have to be just from devotees, it can be from non-devotees. Krishna can speak through anyone, Krishna can give us lessons in so many, it's depending on our eagerness. Of course, these instructions, especially from non-devotees, it must be corroborated with Guru Sadhu and Shastra. If someone says something which inspires us in devotional service, then that is to be accepted. The devotee accepts anything which is favourable and rejects anything which is unfavourable. I remember one time I was on book distribution in Edinburgh, Princess Street, standing outside Fraser's department store, and that was like the passion corner of Edinburgh. When we were young devotees in book distribution, when we arrived in a town, we'd look and see what is the most busiest intersection, and then we'd just dive in there like you were swimming in the rapids of some very strong river. And we had the energy in those days to do it. But I was approaching so many people, like every second you're just approaching somebody, and eventually someone would stop. But it was a bit of a challenge because I was having a hard time. Nobody was stopping for some time. I think I was actually feeling a bit overwhelmed by the constant flow of people and constant rejection. And then this old woman came up to me and says, "Just be bold. Everyone else is bold, so why don't you be bold?" And I just took it, this is Krishna directing me, so I did. And then I thought, I'm going to, at least for the benefit of this old woman, so she gets the benefit of me trying to, if I can do some books based on her instruction, she gets the benefit. So I did, and then it worked. And I took it, this is Krishna reciprocating, because I was praying, how can I get through? How can I get these books out to these people? And then this old woman comes and says, why don't you just be bold? Everyone else is bold, so just be bold as well. And then I was very enlivened, I was very happy, because I realised that this old woman was getting the benefit of the books that were going out that day, because she carried a message from the Lord, and maybe even unbeknown to her. So in this way we can benefit people. If we take something that they say, then they can get benefited. And it's not like we say, who are you to tell me, you smelly old carmy? We don't have that attitude. We think, oh, Krishna has sent someone along to give me some instruction. So our advancement in Krishna consciousness is really based on our eagerness to hear. How can we make advancement? Everyone can help us make advancement. It's not that I only listen to this one and don't listen to that one. And anything you've got to say, I'm not going to listen to it because you said something to once I didn't like. And we make all these restrictions and we condition ourselves. We have, rather than having unconditional love of God or unconditional devotional service, we make so many conditions that I can only do it like this and I can only do it like that. And then we limit ourselves. So don't let our false ego get in the way. So therefore, the point we're just making was that even though it may appear that someone may have, they may not be a pure devotee, it may actually be that that's not the case. It may be just because we don't see them. They may be a pure devotee. Prabhupada says we should be careful when we're associating with devotees because we don't know who's next to us. We might think it's like back to space out, or we may think it's that old croaker, he's just Mr. Grumpy. Or we might think this, or we might think that. But we don't know what they're going through and what their connection is with Krishna. Krishna may be very pleased with somebody and we're judging them. So it's not for us to make any judgment. Krishna is the one who decides who's going back to Godhead. But like we say, oh, that one, he might be going back to Godhead, but that one's not. That one's a complete case. What do we know? How do we know how dear someone is to Krishna? So the point is, Ganges is always seen as pure, and we don't make any distinction of apparent impurities in or on the Ganges. We just take a bath in the Ganges. And similar with devotees, Prabhupada says we should seek the association of a pure devotee or devotees. So therefore, sometimes people say, oh, there's no pure devotees in ISKCON. Well, Prabhupada didn't say, well, you should leave. He says, well, he even said, therefore, devotees. So we might not see them as pure, but we're in the purification process. So someone we might have thought was not pure, last year, they might be a pure devotee this year. And Prabhupada says that the process of surrender is you can decide to do it immediately. As soon as we decide to surrender and we're going to follow Krishna from that point, then we're a pure devotee. It's only a matter of the externals will fall off in due course of time. So therefore, our service to the fallen conditioned souls is to purify ourselves from hearing and chanting so that we can engage in devotional service. And the highest service is to show compassion to the fallen conditioned souls through the chanting of Hare Krishna mantra, distribution of prasadam, and the distribution of transcendental literatures. If we can engage in these activities, keeping ourselves pure, Prabhupada says, in order to preach Krishna consciousness, there's two things which are required. Can anyone mention any one or two of them? Purity, purity is the force, and we must know the philosophy. So one can be very pure, but if you don't know the philosophy, so you might be very pure and then you go out to distribute books and someone says, what's this about? You go, I don't know, I just chant. And I feel very purified from it. So we have to know the philosophy. And on the other hand, if we just know the philosophy, but we're not chanting or we're not engaging in some activities which is purifying us of our false ego, we might know the philosophy, but the potency may not be there. So therefore, and also Prabhupada said that the highest activity is to save yourself. So save yourself first, isn't it? And sacrifice saving yourself in the name of saving other people. There has to be that balance there where we have to be making sure that we're taking enough spiritual nourishment that whatever else we're doing is not compromised. Not compromised. So therefore we have to every day keep in contact with the holy name, keep in contact with transcendental sound vibration of the Shastra, and put into practice by doing some service. The service presents many different challenges, so we take shelter in Krishna. And the chanting and the hearing is so we can become purified and we can understand what we're actually doing, otherwise we forget what we're doing. Many people, they read Prabhupada's books a lot before they join the temple or before they get involved in devotional service, and then they get so involved that they actually forget to read. They have no time to read, but we have to make the time. So we don't forget why we're doing it. So there has to be that whole-rounded program. So therefore, Sri Prabhupada set up this program of Srimad Bhagavatam class in the morning and Bhagavad Gita class in the evening. And And then we have our personal reading to do as well. Sometimes people say they have no time to read, but I remember one time I decided I was going to read the whole Bhagavatam in 1 year. And wherever I went, I took one of the Bhagavatams with me, the little set, I had it in a bag. And if I had 2 minutes, I would just get the Bhagavatam out and read another page. And then sometimes you'd find yourself that you'd have some time to spare. Instead of just like talking Prajalpa or getting involved in some kind of distraction, you just take the book out. And it's actually, you realise you get so much strength from that because you're getting an association of Srila Prabhupada, you get an association of the sages of Naimisharanya, you get an association of the Lord and these great sages and great Maharishis. So therefore, by this association, we become very strong. And even if we find it tight for time, we can always fit it in. Because at one time we were doing 25 rounds a day, full day Sankirtan, from very early in the morning to evening, but still we'd get reading in. So it's a matter of what's our priority, what's important to us. So even if we have a working day, we have to go to work. At lunchtime, we can read a bit of Prabhupada's books. Before I joined, I was working, and I was taking Prabhupada's books into work, and all the guys were like, "What the heck's that you're reading?" And I was thinking, "I don't care what you think. I know what my path is." Anyway, I'll just stop it there. Anyone got any questions or comments? ISKCON Guru ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Haribol.
Gambaki is asking, any tips how to read more? Getting trapped in ignorance. How to read more instead of getting trapped in
Are you still there, Gandaki? Well, okay, if you're still there, Prabhu, then how to read, the question is how to read more rather than getting stuck in the internet. I think the answer is there, and the question is by reading more and not getting stuck on the internet. Because you can't do both of them at the same time. So when the mind says, "Oh, let's go and surf on YouTube or Facebook or whatever it is," just say, "Let's get one of Prabhupada's books out." So maybe what you should do is where your tablet or laptop is, then just keep a book on top of it. And every time you go to the laptop, just pick the book up instead. And if you find it difficult because, there's some kind of habituated connection with the internet, then at least put a certain amount of time aside. At a certain time, for a certain period of time, we do that reading. And it's all about getting a higher taste. Because as we know, the internet can be full of, it's an amazing thing. We can get so much sadhu sangha. We can get access to so much spiritual knowledge. But also there's so much prajalpa and so much distraction there. And even if you start off with some good intention, before you know it, you could be looking at something that you wish you'd never seen. That happens sometimes. And then that can be difficult to erase from the mind. So taking the time, putting some time aside to say, okay, at this time, I'm going to read, or making some arrangement where you keep some book next to your device and you pick the book up instead of the device. And actually a physical book, rather than going onto the computer or tablet or whatever, actually a physical book. Prabhupada says even by touching these books we're benefited. So the touch of the book is purifying the sense of touch. So you can get, and then there's all these lovely pictures, which are windows to the spiritual world. So in this way it really engages our mind. And the principle is by getting a higher taste, then we can give up the lower taste. So this is our challenge, and I'm sure we have this experience that when we take to the hearing and chanting and the reading, then we become less interested in the other stuff, the prajalpa and the other distractions. So just give ourselves the opportunity to get the higher taste. And as Prabhupada would say, just do it. Okay, I hope that helps. Okay, Hare Krishna.